Hello there. If you're watching this, it's probably because I've either run out of guests or, more likely, I'm probably taking a break and could be on holiday somewhere. So I have some specially curated videos for you. They are basically some of the shorts that I've created over the past few months, i.e. cut down versions of Business Jam Live. So I hope you like them, and I'll be back with you shortly with real live guests. In this episode of Shorts, I have some clips from Tim Dew and from Samuel West. Tim's clips are all about how we might be using artificial intelligence, so learning in groups, how we can understand faster, using metrics a little more wisely, and actually understanding productivity. What does being productive actually mean? And if you haven't come across Samuel before, Samuel is a curator of the Museum of Failure. So we look at things like CocaCola Black. That's an interesting one. Who actually makes mistakes? And also attitudes to failures and risk.
We work on the basis of group learning, which again, there's lots of science that supports that group learning is very much more powerful in terms of how the speed at which we can understand complexity improves when we're learning as a group. So not only the speed at which we can solve problems and complexity and understand complexity, but actually the difficulty of the complexity, and also just the sheer load of complexity all goes up as if we're working as a group. So what I do is so with our business simulations, and you know, they've got to be disambiguated away from things that might have been you might have done at university, which might have been a sort of algorithmic sort of spreadsheet or something like that. This is a very sort of in-depth environment, or immersive environment, I think is a good way to describe it, where 12 people have to run and optimize a business together. Now, the complex bit of what we do is trying to anticipate what 12 people are doing at any given time and making sure that they come to the conclusion. So we're feeding, if you like, into this group of people. And I like to think about it like layers of an onion, is sort of ever increasing difficulty of complexities that they have to solve on the fly, but under the duress of time as well. So we give them a business, which is an operating business, which they have to trade. And we do that we give them 26 weeks worth of trade, but except that happens in 26 minutes. So it's all pretty intense, but it's lots of fun because it's gaming. And, you know, as I always say in these things, no animals and children get hurt. And so what we're doing is we're bringing together these individuals to learn for themselves, because after the sort of initial sort of 20 minutes of instruction at the beginning of the day is, you know, that this is what you're going to be doing today. Anyone that comes up and asks a question of one of our facilitators, like, you know, how do we do this? The answer is, I don't know. It's your business. Go and figure it out for yourself. These are not, this is not instructional, because that old adage, which is telling isn't selling, it's so important. It's so true. Let's stop trying to tell people how to run businesses. Let's give them a business that they can break and make mistakes in. And that's the beauty of a simulated environment. And don't get me started on metrics, because that's another kettle of fish altogether. But again, you know, even our own UK government's report shows that 70% of the metric-based programs are not working, and principally that's because the metrics are just creating the unintended consequences. And you can see that everywhere in everyday society, is that metrics, you know, uses of measurements then get converted into targets, and they have really poor results for organizations. And if you go and look at schools, you know, we've got this wonderful thing now where, so I'll give you an example. There's some friends of ours that moved houses to a different part just outside Edinburgh to go to a very well respected school. Got out there and found out that the school was extremely average, but because there was a the parents were all slightly better well off than others, they were all paying for private tutors, and so the result of that is the school was doing a lot better than other schools in different catchment areas but the only difference was the use of tutors. Now how does a league table differentiate that? It doesn't, and it's really poor. And how do we differentiate someone who does pretty average at school, but in actual fact is very good at a number of different things, which might include softer skills as well? It's extremely difficult to differentiate. And actually, I found myself on that doing at school being sort of very, sort of good at a lot of things rather than very good at a few things. But we seem to celebrate those people that are very good at a few things, rather than more generally.
Yeah, it's a
bit broken.
It is. It's also a physical almost a physical manifestation of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. If you step in to measure a system, you're going to change the system that you're going to measure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, just by inspecting it.
and the other problem is, well, here in Sheffield, we see it a lot. These league tables are used in so many ways to decide where there are areas of deprivation, and it has knock-on effects to funding all over the UK, whether it's healthcare or education, whatever. So yeah, bad. In fact, what has COVID done?
Well, I think, in the words of Father Ted, that'll be an ecumenical matter, but
possibly.
So quite big questions there. But let me pick off one of them, at least to start with, which is productivity. So I think that productivity is a very misunderstood expression that is bandied around by people. And it's sort of, it kind of covers a bunch of evils, but it's a macroeconomic term, and a macroeconomic term that just cannot be used for a business. And if you're interested in this, you can go and read Harvard Business Review's attempt where one organization hired a very, very expensive mathematician to come in and actually try and measure productivity, and how it failed. The trouble is that on a microcosmic scale, on a single use case basis, you can't. There are too many variables to be able to measure effectively what productivity is, and effectively that it's the ability to based on inputs, the quality of the outputs and the money generated and so on and so forth. But there are all sorts of problems at all sorts of levels with measuring productivity, and that's a different podcast in itself, which I've done a lot of work on in the past. But suffice it to say, I think the productivity issue across the United Kingdom and Western economies, which has largely been flatlining over the last 15, 20 years, or rather not growing as much as we had previously experienced in the back half of the 20th century, 21st century, I should say, is wide-ranging, and I think it's really got economists scratching their heads because they don't really understand what it is. I think the answer is there are. And this is supposition on my part. I'm not going to make any claims towards it, but I think a lot of things is trying to actually de-brain our organization. So by trying to automate humans and make them do more and more from an automation point of view, process automate a very fixed process way of thinking, sort of takes out the ability for brains within the organization to actually innovate and to find shortcuts and to do that. And I think that in this age of more IT, which does help productivity, it also stifles it as well, because it makes sure that human beings have to go down particular tracks, particular routes to achieve pieces of work. And I think that as a result of that, we've actually got this situation, there's this unhappy situation where humans are being required not to innovate. And as a result of that, they're getting less motivated in the workplace, and that also causes lower productivity problems. So you're less inclined to want to try and solve complexities and interesting problems within the workplace.
Well, what more can I say? I mean, that was it the Pepsi Black or Coke Black? I can't remember which way it was, but the black flavor. I just,
Yeah,
and the Trump steaks.
Man, you're digging into some of the good ones here. The everybody knows about Pepsi, Crystal Pepsi, the clear cola drink, but not so many people know about CocaCola Black. And CocaCola Black was so Coca-Cola in 2000, I think it was 14, 15, if I remember right. They saw a trend in people were drinking more and more coffee, and that coffee is cool. So they're like, let's combine coffee with Diet Coke. That's a great idea. Mixed it together. They have Coca-Cola Black for the ultra sophisticated young professional consumer. That's who was supposed to drink it. It was horrible. I tried it. I remember buying it. I found it in France. I remember at the hotel, I was like all excited because it was a fancy bottle. I tasted it. I still remember pouring it down the drain.
People throw in lots of money, do very sophisticated research, and still get it wrong.
Yeah. But we shouldn't stop at Coca-Cola Black. It's not maybe the most interesting object at the museum, but I mean, Coca-Cola is not a stupid company, and they know their market. They know their consumers. They definitely know the beverage market. If any company does, it's Coca-Cola. So they don't create a new product unless they've done their research, they do their testing, etc. So there's a lot of people, a lot of competent people that signed off on the Coca-Cola Black to launch it. So it wasn't just a test, sort of a random shot out into the blue to see what would happen. And they still failed despite knowing all of that. So it does, what I think it does, it reminds us how risky innovation is, even for these super rich, super competent and experienced companies. But to answer your question, I mean, some of the objects in the museum are just like he said in the video, they're like, what were they thinking? Like somebody just had a great idea, dumped a bunch of money into it, and then it didn't work out. But most of the innovations are still a result of a fairly strict process within these organizations.
You do wonder sometimes, but
so there's one from the UK that I'm fascinated with, but nobody else seems to be interested in it. It's called the Amstrad emailer. Do you remember this?
Well, I know the brand Amstrad, but I can't remember the product.
No, exactly, which is a shame because it killed the company more or less. So what's his name, Sir
Alan Sugar.
Alan Sugar, big shot entrepreneur and inventor. Powerful dude, had this vision that he wanted people to connect to the internet, and this is a great idea at the time. But so he created this advanced fax / computer device called the emailer, and the idea was that everybody could afford to connect to the internet. But by that, it was only email, right? So this device was launched when people could actually buy real computers and connect to real internet. But the Amstrad emailer was a device you could only connect to their servers, and you had to pay a per minute charge to be connected. And the idea was so bad, nobody within the company supported it. Consumers hated it. Everybody hated it. But this bold visionary entrepreneur still, spearheaded the project. and ultimately it led to the demise of the company in many ways, and nobody knows about it. And I'm fascinated with that story, because otherwise usually CEOs and the entrepreneurial founder of a company, the visionary, gets all the praise for being so visionary, but it's seldom we hear of the other side of the story, that it can also be stupidity.
The other thing I want to ask you about before we wander completely off piste later on is the idea of failure itself, because we get all this stuff in the press. Oh, failure's good. You must fail, and
it's great.
I've taken part in many of these debates as well. But people then seem to think to get the idea that failure is almost guaranteed, but the more you do it, the quicker you get to the successful bit, rather than thinking we should just learn from failure when it happens. So are people still going ahead failing as quickly as they can, or has that are they going to keep doing that, or are we going to learn from failure? What's actually happening now, failure wise?
I mean, so failure, I didn't know this at the time when I started Museum of Failure, but I started it at the right time, in like the sort of the zeitgeist of failure, and how cool failure was. There's fuck up nights, there's FailCon, the CEOs of some of the biggest, most well-known company were on stage at the time, 2015, 16, talking about how important it is to fail. So failure was the beginning of failure as being cool. But what has happened since then, and I mean COVID and has definitely played a role in that, is that I don't know if we've reached peak failure or not, but there's definitely a backlash. Like, wait, not all failure is good. And if we fail but don't learn from it, then it's definitely a waste in so many regards. But I think today, to answer your question about how are people still taking risks and failing, I would say no, not enough. I'm obviously biased, but there's still, in most organizations, whether they're public or private, there's still an assumption that you can be innovative without taking risks, and that's just not the case. You need to take those risks where you try unproven methods, and push the boundaries in a way that can be uncomfortable and more or less risk prone. But most organizations need to increase their failure rate rather than decrease it.
Yeah. Is that something they have to consciously do, or should they just be looking at the whole sort of organizational attitude to risk, and say we need to be a little more, because there's the risk reward thing, isn't there? That you can take a little bit of risk and you get a little bit of reward. You can take a lot of risk and get a lot of reward, or a lot of cost. That's whatever. So are we just becoming less risk averse? More risk averse.
More risk averse. Yeah, I would say yes to that, unfortunately, because it's almost like, we want the good part, the rewards of a successful innovation, but we don't want the costs, which are 90% of innovation projects fail. You don't want those, and especially and I'm not going to blame COVID for everything, but there's definitely been a backlash there of like how willing companies are to take risks in innovation, and that's understandable. If you're trying to just survive, then you're not going to be trying to push the envelope forward. But there's also something, like you said before, about learning, taking. So there's different takes and approaches to risk and failure when it comes to innovation. So one of them is, like you say, like just do your thing, and when can you say fuck up on this this podcast.
Well, you just have, so
Okay, so
you've set a precedent.
So go ahead, do your thing, and when you fuck up, then try to learn from it. That's a good approach. I mean, most companies never even get that far, that they're actually willing to take the time and put the resources into learning from their failures. But then there's another aspect of actually taking, called sort of meaningful experimentation, where you actually purposely do experiments that are allowed to fail, that just keep going, where you actually do things that you know are, where you don't know whether they will succeed or not, and you, despite that, you're willing to invest the money and the time into that. And those kind of sort of that purposeful experimentation, which leads to failure more often than not, that's more rare. There are some companies that are really good at it, but they're still very rare.